city.
Mm-hmm.
And there is affordable housing. You just have to drive 30 minutes to the next county over. I mean, you go out to Canton or Marshall, there's plenty of affordable housing.
You know, I think there's a lot of potential in Canton. I think what Canton should do is take that big mill that's next to downtown and turn it into a concert venue. Can you imagine a big stage in front of that and a bunch of lights on, shining on all those pipes back there? I mean, you got a natural, and you're near Asheville.
That's not who lives in Canton, though, man.
But people who live and vacation in Asheville will go to a concert, and people from Charlotte will probably drive out there for a concert.
But people in Canton don't want people from Asheville and Charlotte. They want to stay out of Canton. They're just fine with that.
It is a cool little town. You ever been to Clyde?
Oh yeah, I know the mayor. I was the MPO director up there for 5 years.
Okay, wow, so you know it.
Yeah, no, Clyde with the big clocks out on the giant expanse of asphalt that is their main street. Yeah, they missed an opportunity there. But Canton, the employees actually bought that mill. It's employee owned.
Oh, is it still running?
Last time I checked, they make special paper for like orange juice cartons or something. It's real specific, and their effluent would never be permitted today. I mean, the size, they go into a tiny, tiny little stream that like they could never pull a permit for that today.
Yep, so just got to keep it going.
Yep, but hey, the smell keeps it affordable. You can get a nice house in Canton if you don't mind the smell.
That makes me question, let's see, because is Canton upstream from Clyde? Because Clyde had flooding in like 2004. That's why I was up there, was researching response to flooding.
I don't think so. I think that stream flows down into Canton proper. They're like up out of town, and the stream actually goes into town. Of course, everybody floods because everything's built in the valley.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, is Clyde is all, old Clyde now that it's moving up the hill, but the original Clyde is right in the floodplain. And so it all got flooded out, and then they bought out a lot of the properties along the river. And now they lease them to the neighbors for $1 a year just to keep the grass cut. But now there's all these people that have, gardens, and they're growing food. And you got to think, did you be eating that food?
I'm sure it's fine. I mean, they really did clean the plant up quite a bit. It's a lot better than it was 20 years ago. I mean, heck, if people, I don't know if you remember what the French Broad was like in the 80s, but to see people tubing there, I'm kind of like,
No, I don't know much about that, but yeah, I can imagine. Although, I've been tubing in the Neuse downstream from Raleigh. I didn't overthink it.
Yeah, well, and I don't think it had as much industrial effluent ever.
Yeah, that's true. And as public utilities can tell you, the water's cleaner when they put it back in than when they get it out.
I've seen it. Yeah, trying to do bike facilities in Asheville, there's you want to talk about not having room to work.
Yeah, right.
Everything is narrower than it should be. And we had a really hostile division at the time. The NCDOT division was not very friendly to bikes. Division 14 was fine. So when we went down to Hendersonville, Ruben was the deputy engineer for DOT 14 when I was working up there.
Wow.
So we had a friend down there, but 13 was rough to work with. And if I drop out, I'm at my parents' house. My wife officiated her cousin's wedding down in Florida on 2 Fridays ago. So I'm letting her quarantine at the house, and I'm down at my parents' house near Greenville, North Carolina. And their internet's not quite as good as mine in Cary.
What? You're saying that Spectrum doesn't provide uniform service across North Carolina?
They gave up Spectrum. It was so bad, and we're on Crosslink. And so as long as the whole neighborhood doesn't get on, I'm good. But when the whole neighborhood gets on at 7 o'clock at night to stream Jeopardy or whatever, I start to feel it.
That's how my neighborhood is. Yeah, I live in the country. And Thursday, Friday night around 8 o'clock, everything slows down.
Yeah, but that was a funny story. My wife got a call from her cousin and said, "Would you officiate our wedding?" And she said, "Well, sure. I'm not ordained, but it's Florida, so." She looked up, like, she just had to get ordained, and I think she found the Church of the Dude. You just have to, like, pledge that the dude abides and send in a $10 check, and she could officiate the wedding.
Ooh, that's funny.
Right.
You have to serve White Russians at the reception. That's the rule?
So I'm setting stuff up now.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we can go over to chat and have radio silence here. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the Capitol Boulevard North Bikes and Businesses virtual meeting. We're going to take 1 or 2 more minutes just to let folks join the meeting, and then we'll get started. So thanks for joining us. And if you'd like, if you're joining us by internet on your computer or your cell phone, if you live in the Brentwood neighborhood or the Starmount neighborhood, if you could just type the name of the neighborhood where you live into the comment box, and we'll be able to see how many folks we have from each neighborhood. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday, October 10th virtual meeting for the Capitol Boulevard North Corridor Study. The topic of today's meeting is bikes and businesses. This is the final phase of public engagement for this corridor study. And before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about how this meeting functions. So if you are participating with a computer or a cell phone on the internet, you'll have the ability to type questions and comments in the comment box, which should appear on the right-hand side of your screen or below this video stream. If you're participating by telephone, you can use the star key on your keypad to select to listen to the meeting. You can also select to leave us a voicemail, which we can listen to and respond to, or you can choose to request to speak with us directly, and we can patch you through and talk with you directly if you have questions or comments. So please feel free, if you're having any issues with the video or the audio, to send those comments during the presentation. Otherwise, we will answer or respond to most questions and comments at the end of the presentation. And I am John Anignos. I work for the Planning and Development Department at the City of Raleigh. We also have other staff here from the Planning and Development Department, as well as the Department of Transportation for the City of Raleigh, and our lead consultant, WSP USA. And so we're here to answer your questions. After the presentation, we will be available to you. Okay, so in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about what has happened previously in this corridor study, and then we'll talk about the new proposals that have to do with bicycle and pedestrian facilities along Capitol Boulevard, and finally, policy recommendations that will be included in the final corridor study for supporting small and local businesses. So this corridor study deals with a portion of Capitol Boulevard between I-440 and I-540, and is mostly focused on the commercial areas along Capitol Boulevard. Now, the proposals we have today do involve some of the neighborhoods, because we also know that neighborhoods like to have good bicycle and pedestrian connections as well. And so the previous phases of this study talked about how to improve Capitol Boulevard itself for all modes of transportation, vehicles, bus, bicycle, and walking. And then we also have some land use policies, and we are now towards the end of the study where we're talking about bicycle and pedestrian improvements and policies for community and economic development. And this study is initiated by the City of Raleigh and led by the City of Raleigh, and began in 2018. And now we're again moving towards the end of the study. And after this phase, we'll be preparing the final study report to be presented to the Raleigh City Council at the beginning of 2021, so probably January of 2021, for them to review and adopt. So let's start out with a little bit of background about the previous phases of the corridor study. If you didn't participate in those phases, or it's just been a while, it's been a few months since we've had any public outreach for this. This will help jog everyone's memory. So the first phase of the study, we looked at how to improve Capitol Boulevard itself, and looking a lot at traffic congestion and the growth in traffic that we are expecting in the future. And so the way that we'd like to approach that issue is by converting Capitol Boulevard to what's called a multi-way boulevard. And so what that means is there's different types of lanes in the street for different travel patterns. And so in this image, you can see that there are lanes called through lanes that are towards the middle of the street. And those would be for private vehicles that want to travel the length of the corridor. So people who are commuting, people who are traveling through interstate travel on the highway system, they could use those lanes towards the center of the roadway to bypass all the traffic signals on this portion of Capitol Boulevard. And then the outer lanes are called local lanes, and those would allow all the same access that we have today, or a very similar amount of access that we have today, with local businesses, neighborhoods, shopping centers. And so those local trips would be facilitated through the local lanes. And then in the center of the roadway, we have two special lanes that are only for public bus service, public transit. And so private vehicles would not be allowed to use those lanes. And those lanes would also be able to avoid traffic signals. And the way that those inner lanes are able to avoid traffic signals is that we would need to convert almost all of the intersections along this part of Capitol Boulevard to interchanges. And so what that means is that a cross street like Millbrook or like Buffalo Road would pass over or under Capitol Boulevard and allow those inner lanes of Capitol Boulevard to avoid that cross street. And then the outer local lanes would meet with the local street and would be able to use a traffic signal to make turns and access all the local destinations that they would like to access. And so here's a map of all the locations where we are proposing for there to be interchanges. And there are 2 locations where we are not proposing full interchanges, and those are at Starmount Drive and Oak Forest Drive. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. So after we developed the idea for the multi-way boulevard and the interchanges for Capitol Boulevard, then we looked at some of the areas along Capitol Boulevard where development in the future could be denser, or there could be opportunities for redevelopment. And so those 3 areas are Triangle Town Center at the north end, Mini City in the center part of the corridor. So Mini City, of course, being the Mini City Shopping Center, and the Capitol Crossing Shopping Center in between Millbrook Road and Calvary Drive. And then at the south end, the area where Highwoods Boulevard and Westinghouse Boulevard meet Capitol Boulevard. And so those 3 areas have specific recommendations in this corridor study for how tall buildings should be and what types of development would be appropriate in those areas. So we've completed those phases, and we've gotten a lot of good community feedback about those ideas. And so now we're ready for the next part, which is how do we make sure that aside from Capitol Boulevard itself, there are good ways for people to travel around by bicycle and by walking. And then how do we make sure that the vibrant economic environment that we have on Capitol Boulevard is sustainable and continues to provide services and goods to the community. But before we get into the bicycle and pedestrian improvement ideas, we do need to think about what does that mean when we say bicycle and pedestrian improvements or bicycle and pedestrian facilities? What are we talking about? And so in Raleigh, we have a set of tools that we use for helping cyclists and walkers have a safe and comfortable way of getting around. Of course, sidewalks, all of our public streets are required to have sidewalks on both sides, and then intersections have painted crosswalks. In some cases, we can recommend pedestrian bridges to allow walkers and cyclists to cross large thoroughfares or highways when that is a better solution than crossing the street at the same level as the vehicle traffic. And then bicycle lanes, which can be buffered by painted stripes or raised concrete buffers, or bicycle lanes that aren't buffered and are directly adjacent to the vehicle lane. And just to note, in the future, the city of Raleigh is moving towards a protected bicycle lane as the primary way that we install bicycle lanes. And then finally, multi-use paths. So multi-use path is a wider asphalt path that goes along the roadway and can be used by cyclists or walkers, and is also sometimes called a shared use path or a side path, and also can join with a greenway trail, and greenway trails also usually have a similar design. So when we're thinking about what bicycle and pedestrian improvements would be really helpful for the area around Capitol Boulevard, how do we make those decisions? How do we come up with those ideas? And so we, of course, want to look at background data and do some analysis. And so that's what we're going to see here is here are the inputs that we looked at to come up with these ideas. And so the first thing we look at is the city's bicycle plan, which is called the Bike Raleigh Plan. This is an existing plan that's been adopted by the City Council and is part of our comprehensive plan. And what this says is, here are the streets where there should be good bicycle facilities. And here's how they should connect together to form a network that allows people to cycle all around the city of Raleigh. And so you can see on the map that there's different types of bicycle facilities that are recommended depending on the type of street. And so we are continuing that framework. And so for each street, we are recommending a particular type of facility. We also look at where there are sidewalks currently. And so when we're making recommendations, we want to think of how are we closing those gaps in the sidewalk network. The more connected sidewalk network we can have, the better and more comfortable it can be for someone walking. Next, we had an analysis of the level of traffic stress. And what that means is if you're walking or cycling on a street, is it comfortable? Does it feel safe? And for whom? Is it comfortable only for someone who is really good at riding a bicycle or has a lot of experience riding a bicycle? Or is it comfortable for everyone? And so the way we think about that is, are there sidewalks? Are there bicycle lanes? How fast are the vehicles traveling on the roadway? How close are the vehicles to where someone might be walking or cycling? And based on that, we can look and see what is the level of traffic stress. And that helps us to think, again, what type of facility and where can we close some gaps? And then we also look at where are the transit stops. So this area of Capitol Boulevard is served by the Go Raleigh Route 1, which is the most used Go Raleigh route in the system. And then also there are 3 crosstown connectors that pass through this area to connect to other destinations to the east and west. And so we know that bus service is very important. And so when people are walking or cycling, in a lot of cases, they'll be walking or cycling to or from a bus stop. So we want to make sure those connections are really good as well. So when we put all those things together, we come up with a map of what are the greatest priorities for future bicycle and pedestrian connections. And that looks something like this. And so this is useful. It helps us to think about where we want to start first, but we have to take this a step further and think, well, how do we actually provide these facilities? What is actually going to lead to them being constructed? And the answer to that question is threefold. So there are 3 basic ways that bicycle and pedestrian improvements can be made in the city of Raleigh. The first of those is city-initiated street improvement projects. So the city is on a regular basis looking at streets in the city that need to be widened, that need to have sidewalks improved or added, need to have street trees planted, things of that nature. And so we have basically a rolling schedule of city street improvement projects. And we know that there are several of these that are already underway around Capitol Boulevard. And so we want to think, what can we add to that set of projects in the next 5 to 10 years to, again, be filling in those gaps. And that is the most predictable way for us to implement these ideas. The city has pretty much total control of those projects, and really the main factor of whether they get done is, do we have enough funding and how much time does it take? Because we do have limited staff resources for that. The second way that we can look at bicycle and pedestrian improvements is the Capitol Boulevard street improvements themselves. And the third way is redevelopment of private property. And we'll get into those in just a moment. But going back to the city street projects, there are 7 street projects already underway in the area around Capitol Boulevard North. And those are Atlantic Avenue, which is in the design phase of a project which will add a consistent sidewalk on one side and a multi-use path on the other side. Fox Road is in the construction phase of a project that's going to add consistent sidewalks and bicycle lanes. Green Road is nearing completion of construction of a sidewalk improvement project. Highwoods Boulevard is in the very beginning of a sidewalk project. New Hope Church Road is in the construction phase of a project that will add bicycle lanes and consistent sidewalks from Capitol Boulevard to Green Road. Old Wake Forest Road is at the very beginning of a widening project that will add consistent sidewalks on one side and a multi-use path on the other side. And then Trawick Road and Marsh Creek Road is in the design phase of a project that will add consistent sidewalks on one side and a multi-use path on the other side. So those are a lot of great projects. That's going to add a lot of good bicycle and pedestrian access and connectivity for this area. And so once we think about those, we think, okay, thinking after those projects, 5, 10 years down the road, what's next? And so the yellow lines on this map show generally our system of priority facilities for that 5 to 10 year time frame. And so you can see here, here's the north end. This is north of the split with Lewisburg Road, and this is the south end. And again, the yellow lines represent where we think city street projects should be adding these facilities. And you can also see the small circular icons representing where we'd also like for the crosswalks at intersections to be striped and make sure that those are well marked. And so those are our kind of nearest term recommendations for improving this network. And the two things that I want to point out about this network, the yellow lines, again, that you see in this map, is number one, that this network is providing ways to move north and south along Capitol Boulevard without actually walking or cycling on Capitol Boulevard itself. And so on the southern end, you can see 3 different routes, one through the Brentwood neighborhood, one through the Starmount neighborhood, and one along New Hope Road. And in the north end, basically continuing those up along New Hope Road and along Green Road. And then in addition to the north and south travel that we want to facilitate, there's also east and west travel that we want to make sure is safe and comfortable for traveling to destinations across Capitol Boulevard. And so that's what we're trying to do, and to provide multiple options for both of those ways of traveling. So the next way that these improvements can be installed is through the street improvements for Capitol Boulevard that I described at the beginning of the presentation. So that multi-way boulevard concept with the different sets of lanes and the interchanges is a great tool for making walking and cycling safer and more comfortable. And the way that works is displayed in the image on the right side of this slide. So this is an overhead view of what one of those interchanges might look like. And so what you can see there is that because those inner lanes of traffic on Capitol Boulevard will pass over or under the cross street using the interchange, the pedestrian and bicycle crossing can avoid them completely. And so someone who is walking up to the intersection, to the interchange, will approach a fairly short crossing of 2 or 3 vehicle lanes, and then they'll have a very wide area if they'd like to wait for the next signal to cross the other side of the interchange. And so that's really helpful compared to today, where if you're crossing Capitol Boulevard, you are pretty much going to have to cross 8 lanes of vehicles at one go. What this interchange design is saying is that you will pretty much only have to cross 2 to 3 lanes of vehicles at each point of crossing, and then you can wait in a safe place before crossing the other side. And so this is a design concept that we have for the interchange. We have designs for different types of different sizes of cross streets that'll have interchanges. Obviously, a street like Spring Forest is a very large cross street and will need to have a design more like this. Smaller streets like Trawick and Huntley can have a different design that's more fitting for a smaller local street. And so the reason we made these design concepts is that Capitol Boulevard multi-way project will have to go to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. We will need funding assistance from them. And also Capitol Boulevard is a highway. It's US Highway 1 and US Highway 401 at its south end. And so the way that North Carolina Department of Transportation highway projects work is if the local government where that highway project is taking place has an adopted plan that recommends bicycle and pedestrian facilities, they will include those facilities in their project. And so by putting these ideas into this plan, we are setting ourselves up if and when the street project is accepted by NCDOT, that we can have them install these as part of their project. And here's some example images of what that can look like. And so as you're approaching those interchanges, the bicycle lane will be buffered, protected from the vehicle lane by either striped buffer area or a raised concrete buffer area. And so that, again, improving the level of comfort and the protection from the vehicle lane. So in some areas, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we are not recommending a full interchange with a bridge like those design concepts that I just showed you. And those 2 locations are Starmount Drive and Oak Forest Drive. And the reason for that is that those 2 locations, the level of east and west vehicle traffic is not very large. So the west side of Starmount is Mayflower Drive. It is a dead end on the west side of Capitol Boulevard. And then Oak Forest Drive on the east side also is currently a dead end, though it is proposed to connect through to Sumner Boulevard in the future. But we are not expecting much east and westbound vehicle traffic on those streets. And so the value of a full interchange is not really worth it compared to the benefit to the north and south travel for Capitol Boulevard in those two locations. And so for Star Mountain and Oak Forest, without the interchange to give us the comfortable way for pedestrians and cyclists to cross Capitol Boulevard, we are recommending pedestrian bridges. And so those can look something like this. These two images are examples of what those pedestrian bridges could look like. And those are required by law to be ADA accessible. So they must have ramps so that people who use a wheelchair can make use of them. And they will be connected to our local sidewalk network. And so that is our proposed solution for those two locations. And so going back to our summary map of the overall network, you can see the orange line here along Capitol Boulevard represents the street improvement projects on Capitol Boulevard. And you can see the large circular icons representing those interchange crossing points or pedestrian bridge crossing points. The other thing I'll note about the Capitol Boulevard multi-way concept is that it does propose 12-foot sidewalks on 12-foot wide sidewalks on both sides of Capitol Boulevard. So that is also a great way for walking and could be used for cyclists, but we also want to have these alternatives on either side for cycling as well. And here's the southern end. Again, you can see the orange line representing Capitol Boulevard and those large circular icons representing the interchange or pedestrian bridge crossings. And so when you put this all together, you can start to see that it is a very connected network with a lot of options for traveling, again, north and south or east and west. So that brings us to the third stage of how these improvements can be implemented. And this is the least predictable stage. And so the street improvements for Capitol Boulevard, the interchange projects, we think that those can be done in a 10 to 20 year time frame. And so in the sense of time, we have the city projects in a 5 to 10 year time frame, the Capitol Boulevard multi-way project in a 10 to 20 year time frame. And then finally, with private development, we don't know if and when private property owners will want to redevelop their property. And so we can't really attach a time frame to this. And so this is what we're considering our longest term set of proposals. But what we're proposing for private property along Capitol Boulevard is we have in the city of Raleigh what's called a street plan map. And the street plan map is an adopted policy map that's part of our comprehensive plan, adopted by the city council. Any changes to it must also be adopted by the city council. And it says where there is an existing street, if that existing street needs to be widened to have more lanes, and what type of streetscape it should have. So how wide should the sidewalks be? What type of tree planting or grass lawn should there be? Things like that. And if it should have bicycle lanes. And so the other thing that the street plan does, it says where there's not an existing street, where a new street should go. And what that looks like is shown in this map here. This is the map of the existing street plan map around Capitol Boulevard. And so those different colored lines represent the different types of streets that are recommended. And typically the thicker the line, the larger the street. And so you can see here, the dotted lines are streets that don't exist today, but the city is proposing to exist in the future. The solid lines are streets that already exist. And so what's notable about the area around Capitol Boulevard is that there is only one dotted line. There's only one new street that's proposed on the existing street plan map. And what we are proposing is to add more streets. And the reason for that is, number one, that we want to provide alternatives to driving, walking, or cycling on Capitol Boulevard itself. So from a traffic congestion standpoint, if people are able to access these local destinations without actually getting onto Capitol Boulevard, that can relieve some of the congestion on Capitol Boulevard. The other thing is, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that we have the land use policy recommendations for those 3 areas along Capitol Boulevard, Triangle Town Center, Mini City, and the Highwoods and Westinghouse area. And so in those areas, we are envisioning that there can be denser and more mixed-use development in the future. And so that denser development needs to have sufficient streets to serve it, to allow people to get to the residential uses, the businesses, the workplaces that are in there. We need to make sure that there's plenty of street capacity to serve that denser development. And then the other aspect of this is that these new streets that we're recommending will also be smaller streets than Capitol Boulevard, and so may be more comfortable for people walking and cycling. And so that creates another alternative to walking and cycling on Capitol Boulevard. It also makes smaller blocks. So if you're walking or cycling and you have to go around a very large block to get to your destination, that takes a lot of time, and it may deter you from actually going to that destination. And so by making the blocks smaller, it's easier to get to the other side of the block. There's more options for getting to that destination. And I want to talk a little bit about how these streets actually get implemented. The way that these streets would be constructed is the city does not attempt to build these streets on private property in existing development. What most of these new streets that we're recommending, the way that they would be constructed is if these shopping centers or commercial areas were to redevelop in the future, part of that redevelopment would be that it's required to construct these public streets. So this is not saying the city is going to force anyone to go in and push a street through an existing development. And so here's what those streets would look like. In the south end of the corridor, south of Lewisburg Road, we're generally recommending the Main Street type. The Main Street type is a good street type for walkable commercial areas, which is what we're envisioning for the future, is that more mixed use and slightly more density. And so this is really facilitating that more urban style of walkable, comfortable pedestrian area that's that we don't see a lot of on Capitol Boulevard today. In the north end, north of Lewisburg Road, the new streets that we're proposing are mostly recommended to be this 2-lane avenue. And so this is more for a little bit more of a suburban context, and that is what we see in the north end. But it does have consistent sidewalks and a bicycle lane. In the southern part where we're recommending the Main Street, it's a wide sidewalk and parallel parking. And the other key thing about these recommended streets is that these are pretty much the smallest streets that we have available in the city's street design manual. The street designs that the city regularly uses and are required for new development, these are the narrowest ones that we have for this type of development. And so we are not trying to make this a burden. We're trying to make this a public benefit that serves the general public and these businesses and residences. And just to give you an example of how that will look. So in a lot of shopping centers along Capitol Boulevard, there are private driveways that pass through shopping centers, but they're not public streets. And so they don't have consistent sidewalks. They don't always have striped crosswalks and ways to get from the building to Capitol Boulevard or the nearest street. And so what a public street does is it says you do have to have sidewalks. You do have to have striped pedestrian crossings. And so you can see in these images, these are existing private driveways in shopping centers around Capitol Boulevard. And people are using these today. People are walking and cycling through these private driveways, and they're mixing in with cars. And that's not the safest way to travel around, to have to navigate in between cars that are trying to get into parking spaces. And so let's look at an example of the Capitol Crossing Shopping Center across from the Mini City Shopping Center in between Millbrook Road and Calvary Drive. And so Capitol Crossing already does have private streets that cross it in both directions, north and south and east and west. And so what we're really saying is in the future, we would like for those private streets, if this shopping center is to redevelop, if one of these owners wants to rebuild this as something else, an office building or a mixed use development, that they will be required to convert this private street to a public street. And again, that will require them to have consistent sidewalks and in some cases a bicycle lane. And so here's what that could look like. And so this example image is what it could look like at the north end of the Capitol Crossing Center, opposite the Signet Drive outlet there, that if the shopping center was to redevelop according to the recommendations of the Capitol Boulevard North Corridor Study, that intersection of Millbrook and Signet could look more like this. And so Millbrook, along with the interchange proposals for the Capitol Boulevard multiway, can have bicycle lanes. And then the new public street through the Capitol Crossing Shopping Center can have wide sidewalks, and it can be a more comfortable experience for people walking. And the key here, the goal here is balancing the benefit. So currently, the way that private driveways and shopping centers work, they are focused on cars, people coming in a car and parking. And what we want to do is say everyone should have an equally safe and comfortable trip if they are in a car, if they're walking, if they're on a bicycle. So that concludes the bicycle and pedestrian portion of the presentation. There are more specific details about those recommendations in the materials that are attached to this meeting. So if you go to the survey for this meeting, you can see some more detailed maps. And also those maps are available on the event webpage for this event. So let's move on to policy recommendations for small businesses. And so economic and community development, when it comes to planning processes like this, tends to be more in the form of text recommendations. It's not so much map-based. And so that's what we're looking at now. And so we have a policy document that is our draft policies and actions. And that document actually has policies and actions related to all the phases of the corridor study, but it does include these recommendations for supporting small and local businesses. And so there are three basic ways that we want to approach that idea. The first way is that we have a number of small and local businesses today on Capitol Boulevard. And so just to give you a sense of that, Capitol Boulevard, the area around Capitol Boulevard North, has more than 20% of all the retail space in Raleigh, and is home to over 200 small and local businesses. So we know that small business is a big part of Capitol Boulevard. And so we want to look at, okay, if there's existing shopping centers where small businesses want to stay and the owners of those shopping centers want to keep operating them, how can we support that? And so one way we can do that is we have two grant programs at the City of Raleigh. One grant program is for the exterior of businesses and one is for the interior. And so we just want to make sure that the businesses on Capitol Boulevard are aware that they can seek those funds, that they can request those grants from the city. And so we want to have policies that recommend educating and informing business owners. And then is there a way that we can adjust the scoring of those grants to make sure that it's fairly awarding those grants and is not biased in any way, and is supporting businesses in shopping centers like those on Capitol Boulevard. So that's something we want to look at, is making sure that's that everyone's got an equal chance to get those grants. And then the other thing we can think about is something called a business improvement district. A business improvement district is where a group of property owners come together and agree that they will pay an additional property tax. And so there's a defined area, and within that area, all commercial properties pay an additional property tax, and that the proceeds of that tax go to things like branding and marketing for that area. It can go to things like beautification and maintenance, and also things like special events. And so there's two of those in existence currently in Raleigh, one for downtown and one for Hillsborough Street. And so we have a policy recommending that idea be explored for Capitol Boulevard as a way for businesses to pool their resources and to get a bigger impact in terms of marketing or special events. And then finally, we just want to make sure that the very diverse communities that live and shop on Capitol Boulevard and own businesses are celebrated. And so we want to allow for any streetscape changes in the future, these interchange changes, that if there's public art, if there is custom street fixtures that come along with that, if there's any branding that comes along with that, that we include the community and we use that as a way to emphasize, again, the very vibrant character that we see on Capitol Boulevard, because it is such a great part of what makes Capitol Boulevard an important part of Raleigh. So the second thing that we can think about for supporting small and local business is when we're looking at the multi-way boulevard concept, we know that that is a major construction project. And during construction like that, there is disturbance to local businesses in the form of it may be more difficult for people to get into those businesses during the construction process. And then after the construction is complete, there may be a reduction in access permanently in some cases, and there may be a change in the way that people are able to see those businesses from Capitol Boulevard. If we're proposing bridges, structures like that, they might actually obscure someone's view. And so one of the things that we're recommending is that during construction, that we are maintaining access, and then that in the long term, that these projects keep as much access to local businesses as possible and similar level of access to today. And then also that the new structures that are built on Capitol Boulevard do the best job possible of not blocking the view of local businesses and keeping the street corners as close as they are, as close as they can be to the way they work today. So, you know, the corners of cross streets with Capitol Boulevard, there's usually a sidewalk. You are at the same grade level, you're on an even level with Capitol Boulevard, so cars can see the parking lots. We would like to keep that street corner the same after the multi-way boulevard project is done. All right, and then the final thought in terms of supporting small and local business is, again, we are envisioning that some areas in this corridor are going to redevelop in the future or have more development and denser development. And so that redevelopment may or may not include retail space. And so if a shopping center that has a lot of retail space is torn down to build an office building or an apartment building, there can be a reduction in the total amount of retail space that's available. And also that new retail space is probably going to be more expensive to lease than the existing retail space. And so we want to create programs to help businesses make that transition from an existing retail space to a new retail space. We also want to encourage redevelopment if it goes through a rezoning process for additional height or to change the zoning district. We want to encourage that to those new zonings to allow retail, to not prohibit retail. And then the other thing is we'd like to create a database of local businesses so that when a developer has a new development with retail space in it and they're looking for tenants for that new retail space, we can give that information to them and say, well, if you're looking for a tenant, here's 200 local businesses who might be looking for a new space. Why don't you start with them? So that concludes the small and local business part of the presentation. And that is the end of the presentation, the content of the presentation. And so after this meeting, we encourage you to take the survey for this phase of the corridor study. That survey is available at publicinput.com/R4227. And that survey has the draft policy document linked in it. And it also has this presentation linked in it. So you can just go to that one web address, publicinput.com/R4227, and you can have all this information at your fingertips. You can review it, take as long as you want. Just taking the survey by itself takes about 5 or 10 minutes, so it's pretty brief. We do encourage you to take that survey and share your comments with us. And then after that, we'll be incorporating the comments that we get into these proposals, making any changes that we need to. We'll package all of the phases of the corridor study into a final report, and that will be presented to the Raleigh City Council for review. And there will be another opportunity for you to participate at that time. The Planning Commission and the City Council will have public meetings during the review of the final study. You will receive, if you got a postcard for this meeting, you'll get a postcard for those. And if you got an email for this meeting, you will get an email for those meetings as well. So those are the next steps. And so I'm going to stop the presentation and we will go to comments and questions. And so to remind everyone about how to make comments or ask questions, if you're participating on the internet, You can use the comment box either to the right of this video or below this video to type in a comment or question, and we'll respond to that. If you're using a telephone, you can use the star key on your telephone, and that will give you a set of options, which includes leaving a voicemail, which we can listen to and respond to a question or comment that way, or you can request to call in directly, and we will be able to speak with you via your telephone. So we are open for questions and comments now, and we are happy to respond. So it looks like we have a question. Will property taxes change in relation to new building? So the city does not typically do a lot of evaluation of that. I can tell you a couple things about that. First of all, property taxes, and I'm assuming this is in reference to residential property taxes for someone's home. Those are usually based on the valuation of similar homes in a nearby area. It's not clear to me, just in my very limited understanding of property tax appraisal, that different commercial development would impact the tax valuation of nearby single family homes. So I can't speak to that strongly. The other thing I can say is that, our tax assessments that occur at the county level, we do generally, the county and the city attempt to make those revenue neutral in the sense that if the valuation per $100 of value goes up, that we are balancing that with the total budget of the local jurisdictions. But no, I can't give a lot of information about property taxes. I will add a little bit about that question. If that is in reference to the business improvement district, a business improvement district would not apply to private residential homes or neighborhoods. It would only apply to commercial and mixed use development. So not seeing a lot of comments. I have another presentation with a little bit more specifics about the Starmount and Brentwood neighborhoods. So I'll go through that. And we can just walk through those concepts. So this is the map that you saw before, the yellow and orange lines, but this is a little bit more detailed, closer up. And this is basically the network. And so this is the south end. We have a central portion and a north end. And so we can start by looking at Starmount. And so from an east and west perspective, the first priority area is Trawick and Marsh Creek. And as I mentioned, that is already in the design phase of a project that will add a multi-use path. So that's a great first step. And then north of that, Donna Road can connect from Bog over to New Hope. And then Sue Ellen, north of Buffalo Road, also an east-west connection. And I'll walk through each of those. And then for the north and south, starting out with Edgetone. And so this is close to Stony Brook. And so here's Edgetone. And this offers a pretty direct route north and south between Trawick and Starmount, but it's also pretty close to Capitol Boulevard. So if people want to go north and south, but still access destinations on Capitol, Edgetone is a good choice. And here's what Edgetone looks like today. And then from there, we go up to Bog. And so there would be a little bit of a jog down Starmount to get from Edgetone to Bog. And here's what Bog looks like today. And then at the north end of Bog, where it meets Buffalo, oops, sorry, we'll go to Donna first. Here's Donna today. And that gives connection over to New Hope. And that connection is pretty close to Marsh Creek Park. So if someone's coming from north and wants to get to Marsh Creek Park, they might choose in the future, once these facilities are installed, to take Donna instead of Marsh Creek. So here's Donna today. Then once we get to the north end of Bog, we get to Buffalo. And that area is across the street from a Raleigh Housing Authority development there at Sue Ellen. And that development has a basketball court and a little recreation area just across from Bog. And there's a little sidewalk that goes through to Sue Ellen. And so we have reached out to the Raleigh Housing Authority and asked them if they would like for that, if they would be open to that being, that sidewalk being a multi-use path. And they like that idea. There is a major question about that idea, which is not resolved and will take some more analysis in the future, which is that there is not a traffic signal at this intersection. And so it is very difficult to install a pedestrian crossing without a traffic signal already in place. So that's not something that we can guarantee right now, but it is a connection we'd like to make, because as you can see, without that connection, there's a little bit of an indirect roundabout way that you have to go towards the Ashton Square Shopping Center and then back around to Sue Ellen. So we'd like to make that connection more direct with a multi-use path through the Raleigh Housing Authority property. And then we have Sue Ellen, and then offering that east-west connection that is parallel to Buffalo, so an alternative to Buffalo, and that can provide a connection to get closer to the new grocery store that's there at Buffalo and New Hope, and then also if you want to go north to the mini city shopping center. And here's Sue Ellen today. And so you'll note that, you know, the streets that we're choosing are currently pretty wide and don't usually have a lot of street side parking. And so that's the kind of things we're thinking about, is where is there going to be that comfort level for cycling. So let's look at the Brentwood side now. And so starting from the north, we know that New Hope Church is going to get bicycle lanes and sidewalks, and also Green Road just got its sidewalk improvement project. And so starting from there, we want to look at Arrowwood Drive as the way to get south through Brentwood. And so here's Arrowwood. And so you might wonder, you can see here that then it eventually connects with Huntley. So why not start with Huntley? Right? And so this image gives a little bit of a sense of why not select Huntley. And so the north end of Huntley Drive, as it reaches Green Road, it is a little bit narrow, and there does tend to be people parking on the street on both sides, particularly at the very north end. And so that can be a little bit of a deterrent for cycling. And so when we look at that and we look at Arrowwood, Arrowwood does look like the better option. The other thing about Arrowwood is it does get you a little bit closer to the Terry Moore Square Shopping Center and points east. So that's the northern part of Brentwood. And then we get down to Huntley. And the southern part of Huntley opens up quite a bit. And so even if, you know, we think about maybe leaving street side parking on one side, that seems like that still could be a workable solution. The preference of the city is to have bicycle lanes on both sides for both directions. And so, but, you know, the general condition on the southern part of Huntley is that there is not a terrible amount of street side parking. And then when we get farther south in Brentwood, there's the Marsh Creek Greenway. And so there is a portion of the Marsh Creek Greenway Trail that is constructed in Brentwood Park. So there is a trail, but it's totally within Brentwood Park. And so what we'd like to do is in the future have that connect all the way through to Raleigh Boulevard on the east side of Capitol Boulevard. And then that connection with Raleigh Boulevard can lead to a connection to the Crabtree Creek Greenway Trail, which is south of 440. And Crabtree Creek Greenway Trail connects a lot of Raleigh. It goes from New Bern Avenue on the east end, where it connects to other Greenway trails at Sunnybrook, It goes all the way from there over to Crabtree Valley Mall, and then to points farther west and different trails in the capital area greenway system. And so if we can make that connection of the Marsh Creek Greenway from Brentwood over to Raleigh Boulevard, that's a really big step towards a connected greenway system and bicycle system in this area. And so there is a question of, how does that happen? Of course, the city would have to acquire the private property that's there currently. And then there are some engineering questions. And so that greenway would have to cross underneath Capitol Boulevard. One of our recommended policies in the corridor study is that the multi-way boulevard project for Capitol Boulevard should leave room underneath Capitol Boulevard for a greenway trail on Marsh Creek. And so that's a big priority. Now, there is some chance, just for engineering reasons, that we may not be able to achieve that. That is the #1 goal. But if that isn't possible, then the greenway trail could go onto Brentwood Road and use an interchange to cross Brentwood and then get back onto a trail along Marsh Creek on the east side of Capitol. So let's take a little bit more look at that greenway corridor. So you can see this kind of neon green color represents the proposed corridor for the Marsh Creek Greenway. And so you can see it does have access on both sides currently to that piece of private property. And so again, to make this happen, the city would have to acquire all or some portion of that property. And then there is a question of what is the best connection. So should that connection be made through Longbow to Arrowwood, or should it go directly to Huntley? And that's something that we are not working out in detail in this corridor study because there's too many factors that are not set yet to make those decisions. And so again, you can see if Highwoods and Westinghouse is aligned, there could be an interchange there. We are not directly proposing an interchange as part of this corridor study. There is a separate project led by NCDOT to improve the I-440 interchange with Capitol Boulevard, which may lead to an interchange at Highwoods and Westinghouse. Again, that is very early in the planning stages. But if there is an interchange at Highwoods and Westinghouse, that would also provide a connection east and west in this area. And as I mentioned in the other presentation, Highwoods is also getting a sidewalk project that will connect all the way over to Atlantic Avenue, which we know is getting a multi-use path. And so the more the connections that we have, the more options there are for cycling and walking. And you can see that neon green again, the Marsh Creek Trail going all the way over to Skycrest, which then turns into Raleigh Boulevard south of Brentwood Road. And Hill Street Park is also getting an update. It's being improved in the near future. And one of those improvements is there will be a new entrance to Hill Street from Skycrest. So you can see there's that little piece of Stubb Street at the southern boundary of Hill Street Park. And so the park improvement plan for that park is to add a new entrance, not a vehicular entrance, but a bicycle and pedestrian entrance there. And so that's a really good connection for people to be able to get from Brentwood or other parts of the Capitol Boulevard corridor over here to Hill Street Park. And so here you can see what that looks like in our proposal map. All right, and so that concludes the specific presentation for Starmount and Brentwood. I hope that's added a little bit more information if you're curious what specifically could happen there. And so again, please take the survey, publicinput.com/R4227 to provide any thoughts on these ideas. All right, so let's check back with comments. Let's see, looks like we have a clarification from Paul Black, our bicycle and pedestrian planner. So there's a bicycle plan update that is in the planning process now. And it is, what Paul is saying is that in terms of the connection between New Hope Church Road and down to Huntley Drive, that might be moved back to Huntley from Arrowwood. So we'll keep an eye on that. And if that changes, then we can also modify this corridor plan if that happens before this plan is adopted. So, and the additional information Paul has provided there is that in the near term, Huntley does offer the benefit of there being a traffic signal for crossing New Hope Church Road. And so that is a safety value for walking and cycling to be able to cross while being protected by a traffic signal. Looks like I've got a question. It says, not proposing a specific Marsh Creek Greenway connection, but the map appears to have links to both Brentwood and Huntley. And so, yeah, those links, like I said, are more tenuous. It really depends on how the Greenway Trail is implemented. It is better to have that Greenway Trail connect to both Huntley and Brentwood, depending on how the process of implementing that trail works out. You know, on the Huntley side, it involves more impact to private property. But that is a goal, is to have it connect both to the north and south. So people coming from the north side of Brentwood neighborhood or the south side would be able to get quickly and easily to that Greenway Trail. And the Marsh Creek Trail is part of the current capital area Greenway Trail plan, and there's no intention of removing that, so that the Greenway Trail itself is a very solid goal for the city, and it's not going anywhere. Really, there's just some details of how will people get to and from that trail that are we can't give specific recommendations for at this time. Okay, so not seeing a lot of questions. We are still on the line. If you have joined recently, this is the Bikes and Businesses virtual meeting for the Capitol Boulevard North Corridor Study. We have concluded our presentation for the meeting, but we do still have it available if we'd like to use those images to answer your questions. And we are open now for questions and comments. And so if you're joining on the internet, you can ask a question or leave a comment in the comment box on your browser window. And if you're joining us by telephone, you can use the star key on your keypad to access the options to either leave a voicemail, which we will listen to, or to talk with us directly. There is an option where you could be connected directly through to us on your telephone, and we can talk with you. So please do, if you have any questions and comments, type them in the comment box or use your star key on your telephone, and we're here to answer. So we'll take about 5 or 10 more minutes, just in case anybody joins late or has a final question or comment. And then we will bring the meeting to a close. And while we are waiting for questions and comments, we will have the survey information and contact information up on the screen. This is the Bikes and Businesses virtual meeting for the Capitol Boulevard North Corridor Study. We are open for questions and comments right now. We have concluded our presentation for today's meeting. We do still have the presentation available. If anyone would like to use those images to ask questions or point out any comments that they want to make. If you're using the internet, you can write comments or questions in the comment box, which will be to the right of this video or below. And if you're on the telephone, you can use the star key on the keypad to bring up a set of options to allow you to leave a voicemail for us or speak with us directly. It is now 11:15. We haven't had a question or comment in about 10 minutes. So we will bring this meeting to a close. So this concludes our Bikes and Businesses virtual meeting for Capitol Boulevard North Corridor Study. Thank you for joining us, to everyone who joined us. The survey for this study will be available until October the 25th. Please do take the survey. Again, it's at publicinput.com/R4227. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, I'm John Anagnost, and my phone number is 919-996-2638. And all the information from this meeting is available on the study webpage. If you go to the city website, raleighNC.gov, and search the keywords Capitol North, you can find the webpage for this study, today's presentation, as well as the proposed bicycle priority maps and the draft policy document are all available on that page, as well as within the survey and on the event page for this event. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend.